Hi, everybody. Welcome everyone to Engaging Diverse Communities Plenary Session number 2, Ending the Silence and Stigma Surrounding Suicide in Multicultural Communities. My name is Laura Gregorio. I am the president and co-founder of a company called Humanist Care. I am also on the board of directors at NAMI California. I would now like to introduce our presenters for this session. Hufsa Ahmad is a MECCA Program Development Manager, Multi-Ethics Collaborative of Community Agencies. She is a mental health advocate, public speaker, social worker, and Muslim woman. She has a Master of Social Work from CSU Long Beach and received a BS in Chemistry from Harvey Mudd College. Her life is dedicated to helping individuals with mental health diagnoses find the treatment and support they need. She has delivered over 100 presentations and speeches for 8 years on mental health, including 2 TEDx talks. Hufsa is a suicide attempt survivor, having transformed from a victim of her illness to a champion of recovery. She dedicates her life to helping other individuals with mental health diagnoses find treatment, recovery, and peace, as well as change the world's view of mental health. Ileana Sotawelty is the Executive Director of Multi-Ethnic Collaboration of Community Agencies. She is the Director of MECCA, which is a collective impact organization that works to eliminate racial and ethnic disparities to improve the health, well-being, and quality of life of ethnic communities in Orange County. Ileana has worked in the areas of inter-ethnic relations, intercultural communication, and worked with the schools, cities, hospitals, universities, nonprofits, and police departments on diversity initiatives for over 25 years. Her passion is building the capacity of underserved communities to have a voice and create meaningful systems of change. She advocates to improve the access, quality, and equity of mental health services through collaborative efforts at the county and state levels. And last but not least, Dr. Miguel Gallardo, Director of Research and Evaluation and Professor of Psychology at MECCA, and is a licensed psychologist and maintains an independent consultation practice where he conducts therapy, forensic, legal, psychological assessments, and consults with organizations and universities on developing culturally responsive systems. He teaches courses on multicultural and social justice, intimate partner violence, and professional practice issues. Dr. Gallardo's areas of scholarship and research interests include understanding the psychotherapy process when working with ethnocultural communities, particularly the Latinx community, and in understanding the processes by which individuals develop cultural awareness and humility. Dr. Gallardo has published referred journals, books, and book chapters. Today, Hufsa and her co-presenters will discuss the lack of targeted efforts towards people of color, including the LGBTQ populations. And I will turn it over to you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hufsa. Thank you very much for the introduction. I am going to go ahead and share the presentation. We're very excited to be here. And let me go ahead and do this. If you cannot see it, please let me know. But overall, our presentation is called Ending the Silence and Stigma Surrounding Suicide in Multicultural Communities. So take it away, Ileana.
Sure. First of all, we want to thank NAMI California for having us present today. We're really excited to share the work that we have done with our collaborative. So I just wanted to reiterate our name. MECCA is the Multi-Ethnic Collaborative of Community Agencies, and we work to eliminate ethnic and racial disparities, advance health equity, and we lead a collective impact coalition that seeks to improve the quality of life for underserved multicultural communities. So we have 9 member agencies, but we also have a larger network of partners that we work with, including our educational partner, Pepperdine University, which Miguel is from. Next slide. This is us.
I think you know who we are. So, yeah. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Gallardo.
Well, I wanted to share that, how this work got started. Our agencies have been stigma busters for a long time. We've been doing this work for over 10 years and really trying to do innovative things around reducing the stigma of mental health. There was an incident that happened in one of our agencies, and we were working with a suicide prevention initiative in our county. And one of the strategies that they kept sharing was, let's just pass out brochures. And I felt like we needed to do more, especially after an incident where one of our clients died by suicide. And I saw how the agency dealt with it. There was a lot of silence, obviously a lot of shame, and a lot of ways that I felt like we needed to process this in a different way. And so we began just to hold conversations with our executive directors about this topic. And we also showed the S word and had a large event at a theater. And there was one executive director that was open to sharing her story with suicide. And then we found others as well. And so it took sort of courageous voices to come forward and to open this discussion and to just share how important it was. And for me, it's always been really important to break those barriers, because our agency says we don't talk about this, and that's the problem that we're really trying to solve. So we've had several forums where we've talked about this issue in multi-ethnic communities, and it eventually led to us developing a multicultural suicide prevention initiative, and this is what we're going to be sharing today. And do you want to share a little bit more, Miguel? So you've been part of this journey as well.
I can, yeah, and I don't know if Hufsa, you want to go to the next slide. I think it can really kind of. I think you had called my name to go on over that slide. Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo what Ileana mentioned and Hufsa. By the way, Hufsa was instrumental in leading this program for us, and I think both her own experiences personally and also professionally added so much value and lived experience and knowledge to the work, actually. So I want to acknowledge her and the work and her process with our staff and in the communities. I would just say that the one thing that just stood out to us as we were really taking a deep dive into trying to understand these issues is that within culturally diverse and multi-ethnic communities is that there was just not a whole lot of information out there that was really culture specific and culturally congruent, and that resonated with a lot of community members, particularly the community members of our agencies. Programs, there tends to be this universality approach where one size fits all. I always worry about that because I feel like when we try to fit a square peg into a round hole, you have to kind of shave off aspects of that square peg to get into that round hole, including cultural aspects, values, identity, lived experiences, costumbres, customs, whatever, religious, spiritual belief, whatever it may be. And so I think we wanted to really just keep the square peg as a whole in place and really create a system, a program that fit, that was more, there was more synchronicity and they were more aligned with each other in doing this. And so the literature that we looked through and discussed really talked about there was just a high need. Increase rates are going up in many of our communities, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that today. And then the need to coordinate and collaborate interventions to target specific suicide risk factors was also really, I think, salient for us as well. But we need to keep into consideration too context. I think one of our takeaways today, if you take anything away, is that I think we need to stop sort of blaming individuals and families and really think about the systems in which they exist in. Maybe our families and our individuals who are sort of responding to some of life's circumstances are doing it in the best way they can, sometimes in adaptive, functional ways, sometimes in not so helpful ways. But maybe the systems that they exist in are not well. Maybe those are the things that are not well that we need to really be kind of conceptualizing a little bit differently. and really honoring, the families and the individuals in a different way, and finding the strengths and resources that lie within those families and individuals, and quit blaming them entirely for some of the issues and challenges that they're trying to, endure and move through, and start to change systems. So I'll stop there, Hufsa.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So to go over the program real quick, we really wanted to use community-based participatory research to make trainings that were not one training that was translated into multiple languages. We didn't want to do it that way. We wanted to go to the community, so we had focus groups and interviews done with the ethnic communities that were in that community's language. It was led by leaders in the community who were trusted, and we got specific feedback on how the community perceives suicide and what they would like to see in a suicide prevention training. I did design the training, but I worked with all 9 agencies to adapt that training to their specific population. So each training has the same content, but it is customized, not just translated, but it is customized to each cultural community based on what we learn in these focus groups and interviews. We also considered youth as well. We interviewed youth and we developed youth trainings as well. And it was translated into 6 threshold languages and the subwhole translation combined. We also had a social media campaign that had PSAs and handouts done that were culturally responsive. And we also had a big component focused on the LGBTQ plus community that was led by our VROC organization, the Vietnamese Rainbow of Orange County. So I would like to show you one of the PSAs, so I need to exit this real quick. This one was done basically as a way, like every agency made this PSA about, sorry, let me share my screen. I cannot multitask. Okay, share sound. And okay, here it is. So this was done by Southland. It's in Vietnamese, but it does have English subtitles.
Tôi tên là Vinny. Tôi tốt nghiệp một trường đại học rất là danh tiếng tại California. Tôi là một người đứng đầu trong một cái hội ở tại trường học. Tôi chơi tennis và tôi rất là thích đi ra ngoài cùng bạn bè. Ngày qua ngày tôi lại có nhận thêm được rất nhiều sự từ chối từ những cái chỗ tôi xin việc làm. Các bạn của tôi đều bắt đầu sự nghiệp của họ. Tôi không được quyền hạnh phúc trừ khi mà tôi cũng giống họ.
Tại sao nó lại lười biếng như thế? Nó ở nhà cả ngày và chẳng làm được cái việc gì hết.
Tôi rất là mệt mỏi, tôi không muốn đi ra ngoài chút nào hết. Tôi cũng chẳng muốn làm cái gì hết.
Tại sao nó không biết cố gắng nhiều hơn nữa mà chỉ có biết nghĩ đến việc từ bỏ?
Tại sao mọi thứ lại khó khăn đến như vậy? Ai cũng thành công hết, ngoại trừ tôi.
Nó có hết tất cả những gì nó cần rồi, mà nó đòi hỏi thêm gì nữa chứ?
Chẳng có ai hiểu tôi cả. Tôi cảm thấy rất là đơn độc.
Tại sao nó không biết phụ giúp công việc nhà đi chứ? Ngay cả việc tắm rửa cho bản thân mình mà nó còn không chịu làm.
Tôi thật là vô dụng. Cuộc sống thì chẳng có ý nghĩa gì nữa hết.
Rốt cuộc là nó có mục tiêu gì cho cuộc đời của nó đây?
Tôi không còn muốn sống nữa. Tôi muốn tự giết chết bản thân mình.
Mình cần phải nói chuyện và giúp đỡ cho em nó thôi.
Em muốn nói chuyện với một ai đó.
Em đang cảm thấy như thế nào? Có thể nói cho anh biết được không?
Em không có một cái động lực nào hết. Em cảm thấy như bị lạc lối. Em nên làm gì với cái cuộc sống của em đây?
Anh sẽ giúp cho em nhé.
Em muốn trở lại cái cuộc sống như trước đây của em.
Chúng ta cùng nhau thay đổi nhé.
Hãy nhớ bạn không đơn độc, sẽ luôn có gia đình bên cạnh bạn.
Okay. So I think what was really powerful about this PSA is that it really examines not just what is the kind of current perception of suicide and the current stigma in the community, but it also offers the transformation that with understanding, with conversation, we can overcome the barriers, we can overcome the stigma. And every training that we made was developed in a way that it was a journey where people would start, the community would start with the discussions, like, how do we currently perceive mental health? How do we currently perceive suicide? An examination, like, is this the right way? Is this how we really want to go about it? Culminating with what can we do differently? Like, how can we have conversations differently, with our parents or with our kids or with the community. And it was really a transformative experience, all of the trainings that were done. So I'd like to go over cover language. I'm sure this has been talked about, but I really do want to emphasize that language is quite important. So terms like committed suicide have the connotation as very negative, like one, committed a sin, committed genocide, committed a crime. But another reason that committed suicide is not correct is because it demonstrates a lack of understanding of suicide. That suicide is not necessarily a conscious action that's done with reason, which is the connotation whenever you commit a crime or a sin, that you know what you're doing, it's fully conscious is what you do. Rather, when you say died by suicide, it's kind of the same way of saying someone died from a heart attack or died from cancer. Like, that suicide is really the source, and it's a function of the illness or the circumstances. So not only is it less stigmatizing, it's also just more correct to say died by suicide instead of committed suicide. We also don't want to classify attempts as successful and unsuccessful, because we don't want to place a value on a suicide attempt. Like, calling a suicide attempt successful has a positive connotation, but obviously that is not a positive act. So rather, it's just better to say attempted suicide rather than adding unsuccessful or successful. Now, Dr. Geyer is going to take over on this part. Basically, we are going to go over the results of the focus groups and interviews and what we found. I will say that we interviewed 8 different communities. And so we have grouped it into Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latino/Latinx, but that's not to say that every Asian country is the same as every other Asian country. It's just a way to kind of disseminate the information such that it's less overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think because I know we don't have a whole lot of time today, Hufsa. I'm gonna just give an overall framework before I jump into just really briefly going over the no, you can leave it on that slide if you want to.
Okay.
Up to you. Before I go into some of the specific ethnic communities that are part of MECCA, but I just want to we ran some focus groups and we did some one-on-one interviews, and we had about 251 community members, who participated in focus groups and one-on-one interviews. And we gathered all that data, looked at it, did some qualitative, analysis of that data. And there were really 6 overarching themes that surfaced from all the interviews that we did and focus groups that we ran with these community members and agencies who were implementing the program in our various ethnic specific, community agencies. And so the one that, the 6 themes that came out were identifying high risk community members. So in other words, many of our agencies, and community members were very clear about, being able to identify who they thought were at higher risk of suicidal thoughts, behaviors, etc. And particularly, I think even within the LGBTQI plus communities, they talked about feeling marginalized, and many of our communities talked about being minoritized, and not minorities because that's a different connotation, but minoritized, pushed to the margins, if you will. And by the context in which they live in, the narratives, the discussion, work, family sometimes. And so there was a sense of, which was really interesting, that I think many of these agencies really felt like they had a sense of who maybe wasn't doing so well in some of their communities. And then the second highest area that was endorsed by all these interviews and focus groups was the stigma. So on the one hand, you have within all our communities, there is a sense of like, okay, we can tell this person may have something going on, may not be doing so well. But then you have stigma, which is also so present and so prevalent in many of our communities, that was sort of a barrier to really doing something or taking the next step or trying to engage in a conversation or connect with a service that might be helpful or whatnot. And so I think, you know, stigma was very, very much present. Psychoeducation also came up. So it's like, we know we can identify some high risk folks. There's still a lot of stigma in all our communities that's very present. And then at the same time, we want more information. We need to know sort of what to do, but we need the information to be relevant to who we are and where we're coming from, and to meet us where we're at, and to not try to apply this is how you should do it, you know, because this is what everyone says you should do kind of a thing, because it doesn't always work for us in our communities and within our families. And so they really did want information, which we thought was really important, because there is a need, there is a desire to have information around how to identify the signs and, you know, risk of suicide, and you know, where to access help for those who might be struggling. And so that was very also one of the higher endorsed themes that came out of these you know, these focus groups and interviews in many ways. And then simultaneous to that is that people just were not sure how to respond. They didn't know what to do. So they wanted information on how they could personally respond to someone who was at risk of suicide or had been thinking about suicide. And so that not only do they not know sort of like, we think this person in our community or family is not well, not sure what it means. So we want some information about what are the signs and symptoms that we should be looking for. And then, like, what do we do when we have a family member or a community member that might be struggling in some ways? And then they also, one of the things that came up is they also shared, you know, a lot of like what their ideas in terms of what they believed individuals and community members and agencies should consider when implementing, you know, really trying to address suicide, particularly among adolescents, adults in their community, et cetera. And so really all the things that came out of that particular thematic area were really ethnic, culture specific, you know, information in many ways. And so more training, but also training that was in their language, training that took into consideration historical, generational, cultural values and the socio-political cultural context in which they exist in. So there was a need for really understanding, like, how we want to know how to do this, but we want it to be done in a way that makes sense for us. And then many of these communities, the last sort of major theme that came out was religion and culture, religion, spirituality, and culture. And so many believe that shared how their religion and culture and family values really can play a role in preventing or managing, you know, at community members, family members who might be at risk of suicide attempts, suicide ideology, et cetera. And so many talked about how, you know, at times those aspects of their culture, religion, can be advantageous, and also at times can really be a challenge in some ways. But they were all using those as resources internally to help and to try to address, and they felt like those needed to be used more, you know, moving forward. And so I want to just highlight some of that a little bit, because I think that kind of just sets into a context what the next few slides are. So what we have on the next few slides are just some specific comments that you know, some of the agencies made. Here's one of our Middle Eastern, you know, community members talking about, you know, God, you know, can you go back one slide, Hufsa? So this idea that God, you know, forbid if we show any sort of weakness or, you know, think we are doomed, you know. So there's an instance where religion can play an important role, but also really can be a barrier sometimes as well. Okay, Hufsa, you can keep going. And then, you know, just some other comments. The stigma, you see the stigma highlighted in some of these quotes from some of the, you know, community members around the person must be crazy or just wants attention. You know, it being a sin, you know, what are some of the barriers, you know, ego, pride, And then, really thinking that people can just solve some of these concerns on their own. Okay. Next slide. Yeah. And then, all of these, we also wanted to sort of provide, I think, messages of hope as well in many ways. And so, really a lot of what came out of our conversations were messages of hope and optimism, if you will. So, if you seek the right services, if they're culturally relevant, then you can sort of get better, if you will. They were interested in participating in a Farsi suicide hotline, and then also faith. Again, here's a faith, I think, strength where it says we are taught as Muslims not to decide when to end lives, and this can save us as well. Okay. Next slide. And then, in Latinx communities, there was this notion that people don't really react or respond until it's too late. I always joke around because I do a lot of work in Latinx communities, and I always say, like, how many of you grew up and your parents told you don't take naps, we don't stop, we don't rest. If you take a nap, it means you're lazy. If you take that's true in other cultures as well. I'm speaking from my own communities, and so there's this thing around you just have to keep going and pushing through and moving through in some ways, as if that's the best way to do things. And I think that carries over into a number of other areas in our lives, including sometimes when we might be in dealing with some mental health concerns as well. And I think this comment, really captures that sentiment, if you will. Okay, Hufsa. Some of what our participants said, again, you see that this idea of it being sin, it not being okay religiously, that the taboo, going to see a psychiatrist or mental health providers, those are crazy doctors. Humor, using jokes to cover things up. So, different ways of coping and adapting, that some can be adaptational, some can be barriers to getting the help that they need. Okay. And then, some of the insights, mental health systems can be oppressive, which I mentioned at the outcome. And, not all of the blame can be towards, just what's embedded in our communities and in the individuals. We need to think about the systems as well. And then, a lot of the interest from our community members and Latinx community members, they wanted specifically designed trainings for them, multi-generational trainings, and also to sort of impact the younger generation of folks as well. Okay. Asian cultures, I really love what Hufsa said around, we're not trying to sort of, make too many generalizations here, but we sort of are using some overarching, labels, if you will, knowing that there's some limitation to sort of how we identify and label community members, but nonetheless, we're trying to gather some information. So, here's one from Korean parents, won't let their kids hang out with kids who seem to struggle with depression, because they think that they're going to sort of become troubled themselves. We know that isn't true. Okay, Hafsa. Again, seeing mental health as mental illness is a sign of weakness. Really also about protecting one's family image and saving face, if you will, and not damaging the family's reputation. And then really just learning to sort of suffer in silence, and really thinking that that's the best way to deal with things, and really learning that may not be. Okay, Hafsa. And then compassion. A lot of our community members in our different ethnic Asian specific agencies talked about compassion and really responding in a compassionate way. Really thinking about language. One of the things that we learned in doing this work, and this may not seem as like a surprise to many of you, it certainly wasn't to us, but I think it was really profound, that there aren't words in some of our communities' languages to really capture these sentiments, these experiences, these actions at times. And so even just really understanding like how communities understand, talk about, and also really believe what are the means of restoring health and wellness are critical to a successful program for preventing suicide and also increasing awareness. And so that certainly came up across the board as well. Okay. We didn't run any community groups with in the African American Black community, but we know that this is important, and it's an area that is we need to continue to do more with. There was a great paper that came out, Ring the Alarm, Black youth suicide, and it talked about how Black youth's suicide has increased, over the past sort of, about 15, 20 years or so for Black adolescent boys and girls. Injuries by attempts rose 122%. For Black adolescent boys during between 1991 and 2017. We're seeing, some of the same thing, for young Black adolescent girls. So something's happening in our Black African American communities that we need to really be aware of and really attend to. This study said that the suicide death rate among Black youth has been found to be increasing faster than any other racial ethnic group. I think there's I don't like to get into comparisons around who's got more or less, but there's something there that we need to pay attention to. And so here are some comments that we had some collaborators who really represented the voices of Black communities in the experience. And these are some of the comments that were made from there as well. So the comment around pull yourself up by your bootstraps, I love that comment because Dr. King said, what if you don't have any boots? And if you have boots, what if your boots don't have any straps? And so really it's around recognizing that mentality may also be more harmful at times than helpful, okay? And then, I think I went over this already. I don't want to spend too much time with that, Hufsa. And then, Native communities. I mean, this is sort of an area that for me is no one's talking about this. And over this last 2 years during COVID and during the pandemic, the rates of suicide for Native communities has increased exponentially. And we're not talking about it. We're not talking about it at all, actually. And so, in general, we know that from statistics and data that, Native communities, are maybe around 60 or so % more likely to experience the feeling, that everything is and that's happening is not positive, not going well. There's a struggle there, and that certainly has been highlighted over the pandemic in many ways. When you look at the overall death rate from suicide for Native communities, it's about around 20% higher than compared to the non-Hispanic white community and white populations as well. And so we see those rates increasing, and I think it's us not talking about it and not acknowledging it would be an injustice as well. We need to lift those voices and make sure they're present in our conversation as well. Okay. Okay, Hufsa. And this is just intergenerational trauma that we're talking about here. And we know that intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, really affects many of our communities based on immigration histories, based on legacies of colonization, based on the legacies of white body supremacy. And these issues, I think, are still very present and still very much a part of our community's existence, even at this very moment. And I don't think we give enough attention and time. In fact, the more time and attention we try to raise about these issues, the more pushback there is that we're trying to create more division and divide. And that simply isn't the intent nor the case in this way as well. So, okay, all right, Hufsa. I think I already went over that, and so I don't think I need to go over that again. Is this still me, or is this back to you, Hufsa?
I can take over from here.
Okay, cool.
So definitely, Dr. Gallardo did talk about, the collective themes of stigma that you see in all the communities. This idea of people who are experiencing suicidal thoughts are crazy and hiding the cause of death. Lack of resources is really important. For example, the National Suicide Hotline is only in English and Spanish. So if you only speak Farsi, there is literally no number you can call that can help you with experiencing suicidal thoughts. And there is a lack of appropriate language. Like, for example, in the Vietnamese community, the only word for mental illness is crazy. That's the only word that exists, which obviously has so much stigma alongside it. So what do you do if you don't even have non-stigmatizing words to talk about things like mental illness? And I know we showed a lot of slides that talked about the stigma and, you know, the stigmatizing thoughts, but I really do want to emphasize that yes, there is stigma, but that does not mean that people don't want to help. Every focus group, people did talk about how they wanted to help. They just didn't know what to do. They were open to the training. They wanted to learn, how do you help someone who's experiencing suicidal thoughts? And they wanted a training that's specifically designed for their community. They wanted to go. And it was also very important because we learned a lot from these trainings with regards to strategies for the future. We saw that there were strengths in all of the communities related to family, religion / spirituality. People wanted to work with someone who is, you know, culturally responsive and knowledgeable about the resources. And overall, we do see this high value on work ethic and education. We see resilience, we see emphasis on family and community. All of the groups have coped with trauma and racism and discrimination and have this racial identity that is very strong and brings a lot of pride. And there is this emphasis about people wanting to discuss problems with family and friends because they did feel connected to others. And after the training, we collected evaluations and we read through all the evaluations. We did one final revision of the trainings based on that feedback. And we had some very powerful quotes that people said, I never thought the Persian community would be open to this kind of discussion or training, and was greatly surprised by how open the discussion became. Our trainings were slated for an hour, maybe hour and a half, but sometimes people were talking so often that one training went to 2.5 hours just because people said we never had the opportunity to talk about it. And finally, the opportunity was presented to them and they just couldn't stop talking. They talked about how there was kindness and compassion in the people who were attending this meeting. And they talked about how important it was to get this training from someone who understands the culture. That was such a crucial part that is missing from mainstream suicide prevention trainings, which are not customized for the culture, that don't have the intricacies and in some ways kind of contradict what we've learned in the focus groups and interviews. So definitely moving forward, we want to consider a lot of things like cultural mistrust and stigma is very big. Again, mainstream suicide prevention trainings, a lot of them say, ask right away directly, are you thinking of suicide? But we learned that may not be the best idea. For example, in the Cambodian community, I was told that if you were to ask, for instance, like an elderly person, you know, are you thinking of suicide? That is considered an insult. It's considered something that would cause the person to feel very, very ashamed that you would even ask that question. So instead of that, we want to think about building rapport and warming up to the question. Like eventually you do ask the question, but you want to learn how the community talks about suicide, and you want to ask the question in different ways. Like, you know, do you feel hopeless right now? Do you feel like things are ever going to get better? Like, is there times where you go to bed and wish that you wouldn't wake up? You know, get the person to talk, build that rapport, and then whenever the connection is made, to ask that question directly. We also want to involve individuals from the same community and focus on the protective factors and strengths that we've talked about, not just cultural strengths, family bonds, spirituality. And as for larger considerations, we do want to find alternatives to 911. People have described how they've reached out about suicidal thoughts and their friends freaked out and called 911. Police show up at their home, put them in handcuffs, put them in the back of the car and take them to the hospital. A lot of the communities, especially multi-ethnic communities, don't have the best relations with the police. And so we do want to find alternatives to 911. Of course, if it's an emergency, if the person has attempted or is going to attempt, 911 is the correct answer. But if the person just wants to talk, We want to think of other ways we can go about it. We want to think of how can we connect with this person, figure out what's going on with them, find the alternatives to 911. For instance, the CAT team in Orange County, centralized assessment team, will actually travel to the person and do an in-person assessment. We also want to employ bilingual and bicultural staff, and hire peer specialists into the community. Peer specialists are individuals with lived experience who have gone through it, who may not be clinical, but can share their lived experience and have an empathy that may be lacking in other mental health professionals. And so we do want to incorporate peers into treatment. We want to create opportunities for people of color with lived experience to share their experiences too. We want to hold conferences, we want to hold talks and speaker series where invite people of color to share their experience, because the more that people can see someone like them with similar experiences going through the same thing, that builds connection, that builds hope, and that increases the likelihood that people are going to reach out. And not only that, we want to find culture-specific resources. And MECCA was able to put together a handout deck of culture-specific resources in Orange County. And so I think Dr. Garda already went over this at the beginning. So I'm going to let Ileana take over.
Sure. Our approach to this work was we had a multi-strategy approach, multicultural and multimedia approach. And in the midst of the pandemic, it was necessary to do all of these things and to have these conversations. We named the training Strengthening Our Ties, and we had it in 7 different languages, but sometimes that didn't always translate. So some of the agencies chose to call the training by different names, and that was okay. We also had a youth-specific training and a provider-specific training, as well as an LGBTQ training. So we have a multitude of trainings that we can use with multiple audiences. Next one. We use the MECCA survey that's in the CIBHS website. I can put the link in the chat. And as you can see, our participants rated this training pretty high in all areas. And these are just some of the examples of the results that we received. This is our flyers. We used the Know the Signs resources and through the state, and we changed them into different languages. And so we incorporated them into our multimedia strategy. I also put in the chat a list of all of the resources. We have a catalog of resources. We specifically did a lot of work in the LGBTQ community, and I'll put the video that we don't have time to show, but in your spare time you can watch BOCES Red Flag Race. It's Orange County's version of RuPaul's show, and it's probably the most entertaining thing I saw last year. Really was a way that for the LGBT community to talk about suicide and mental health in their community, and it kind of went viral, and it was just a great resource for that community. I have to admit that when they approached me with the idea, I was like, oh my gosh, we're getting resources from the county. Can we do this? And then I was thinking, well, yeah, this works for this community. We have to do it. So it was the most creative, I think, PSA that we got. Next one. This is the LGBTQ, some of the examples of the multimedia posts that they did. And they decided to use Be the One, which is tied to a website. And if there's only one person that someone can connect to, that's all that is needed to really kind of change the dynamics for that person and get the support that they need. So that's what this strategy centered around. Next one. These are some of the posts that we had, and you can visit our Instagram or our site on Facebook at Orange County MECCA follow all of the different posts that we did. And they were also translated into different languages to make them more culturally responsive. And we developed a toolkit, and every agency, changed the language in a way that could reach their community a little bit better. And then I also put a link in the chat of our YouTube channel, which you can find more PSAs and individual stories as well, like Jorge's, which is in Spanish, and he talks about his suicide journey and how he recovered from that experience, as well as suicide survivor story as well. And her experience with that was one of our staff members from one of the agencies, and she shared her story, which was really, really powerful. Next one. Next slide. That's Jorge. We don't have time to share that. But if you have any questions, please let us know. We're here to answer any questions you have about the work. You can put the questions in the chat.
Thank you so much. You guys all fantastic. So much incredible work that you're doing. We are now going to open the floor and take questions. Please use the chat box to type in your questions. I want to remind everyone to honor the community agreements we went over at the beginning of the session. If we do not get to your question, because I know we just have a couple of minutes, we can collect them and answer them in a follow-up email. So the floor is open for questions.
Yeah, don't be shy. We're friendly people. We would love to answer anything you have. But you can also reach out to us or go to our website or call us later as well.
Yeah, I got a question from Denise around just sort of, how Mexican Latinx community members viewed mental health treatment, people who may attempt suicide. And so my response, I send it to everybody that, just sort of what we already talked about. So that's my response is. It's in regards to Denise's question to me around just how Latinx communities may have responded and kind of think about this as well. So.
I also wanted to just highlight that in the chat, I put a link to MECCA's Health Equity Series, which is going to premiere on October 29th from 12 to 1:30, and there's a link to register. We have a 3-part series that we're doing in collaboration with some of our state partners, California Pan-Ethnic Health Network, Public Health Advocates, and Change Lab Solutions, along with some other great speakers as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Hufsa and Ileana and Miguel, for the amazing presentation and incredible work. Any questions on the content, you can also contact them directly. Any questions or concerns about today's event, feel free to email nami.california@namica.org. And you are welcome to leave the session and move on to the next part of your agenda. We invite you to take the evaluation survey sent to you at the end of the conference. Your feedback will really help to shape our next conference. And please remember to take time for self-care breaks as well throughout the day. Oh, one question it looks like came in from Huva. Do you see more people of color entering the mental health field? Anybody want to take that in our last minute?
Not enough. The system is still, I think, inaccessible to many of our community members in many ways, based on curriculum expectations, cost of attending. I just don't think we are doing a good enough job of creating a system that is accessible and that affirms and validates the lived experiences of the communities that we're asking our students to go out and serve and train them. I think many of our programs are still inadequately preparing the students to go out and do the work that needs to be done. And with many of these community members, and students will report that they feel like they're sort of overwhelmed with the process and whatnot. So we need to develop the educational pipeline with BIPOC communities for sure. Absolutely. They're still the disparity is still too high, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, if I could add real quick, I feel like we're not doing a good enough job of recognizing that suicide is a public health problem. Like, I really think that everyone should be trained in suicide prevention. I want to see a world where it's as easy to get a suicide prevention training as it is to get a first aid CPR training. Like, yes, most people who get trained in CPR probably will never use it, but you know, it's important to know just in case. So why are we treating suicide prevention differently? Like, it's more likely that you are going to run into someone who is having suicidal thoughts or even a mental health crisis. So why are we not training everyone on that process? Why are we not training in schools and workplaces and general public and colleges? Why are we not doing that? I want to see a world where that happens, because suicide is very serious. You know, honestly, I had a friend who's a speaker who gave a very inspirational TED Talk on suicide prevention, and I found out last week that he actually died by suicide. And this is someone who spoke about the cause, who is very passionate about it, and he was in contact with people, but I don't know, you know, exactly what happened, but it's just sort of like, you know, everyone is at risk and everyone could benefit from the training. Like, I don't want to have to, you know, every couple of months get a message from someone that a friend or someone I knew died by suicide. Suicide is preventable. Vast majority of cases, 90% of people show signs, warning signs of suicide. So I just, you know, I want to see that. And I hope that maybe you guys can do something too, like pitch the idea to your workplace or your college, like, hey, why don't we do a suicide prevention training? You know, we can help with that. We offer trainings. We offer many different trainings, including mental health first aid. I want to see that world, because I just can't keep losing people.